defendable. And that was very important because of my belief and the belief of many other people that I have great respect for, that the world is going through I'll call it a meltdown. Once the people found out what had been done to them by their representatives, they felt that it would be much better for their health and safety to be somewhere else. My understanding, it was the third ever closed session of Congress. We found that no matter where the politician was and what committee he was on, when top secret things were talked about, they wanted to close the session early so they could get out and put their tips out to the news. So we don't have any confidentiality in that, so it leaked out, I'm sure.
Am I right in assuming that you wouldn't contradict those leaks?
I wouldn't contradict them at all.
Thank you. This is Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and this is Monday, June the 29th. And this is a Project Camelot interview with a difference, because not only have I flown the best part of 8,000 miles, at least it feels like it if it's not quite that many, from Europe to be here for the weekend, but we are also here with David Wilcock, who's also flown to Los Angeles here for the weekend to join us in a meeting that we had with Dr. Peyt Pitërsъn, who's a name that not many people will know, but maybe among the many extraordinary whistleblowers and contacts and researchers and scientists who we have had the great pleasure of talking to, maybe one of the most important. And yesterday we were talking off record for the best part of 12 hours, and our minds are still digesting an enormous amount of extraordinary information that he shared with us, some of which is off record, and as much as possible, Pete is willing to put on record here, on camera, because you feel, don't you, Pete, that there is profound and important reason why the sort of people who will be watching this video need to hear what it is that you have to say. We want to salute you because you're a very brave man. And one of the things we want to ask you, straight off the cuff, is why is it that you feel that you wanted to put some of your almost unbelievable and very important testimony on camera for a lot of people to listen to and watch and understand at this time? Why is it that you've come forward and you're talking to us now?
Well, I think the main reason for that is that I've had a inside insight for many, many years, having been picked up in various programs to do things for the government since I was 13 years old. And being a problem solver, I wish I could say that it was hard work and so forth, but I come from a long line of inventors on both sides of my family tree, and people who graduated from school very early, and were significant in affecting things that affected humanity, a number of them in virtually every kind of field and climate. And I see that the world seems to have gone downhill. I'm aware of many programs to remove intelligence from people and return the people, at least of this nation, to a mediocre status. We've watched the school systems deteriorate. We've watched as my wife likes to say, the program in the school systems, No Child Left with a Mind. And that's her paraphrase for it. And I've seen that the type of government we have, though I'm a patriot and very crudely use the phrase that I got the flag tattooed on both cheeks of my fanny the hard way. I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, and a great part of that was in combat and combat zones and other things I did for the government, and like to think I am unique in that I was probably shot at on most continents. And anyway, what I see happening is a complete turn away from the way this country started out and then its constitution to what appears to be headed toward a socialistic system where reason and logic has no bearing, and it concerns me, and I have no idea if my voice can help. I have no idea if that can, but I know that my ideas, I have inventions that have proven to be very helpful to society, and many of them have been suppressed by the fact that we had a government that was run by industry rather than by the people. And it's turned away from that, and many industries are actually governed by rules and regulations that make it virtually impossible for them to exist if they do things that are good for humanity. Mm-hmm. For example, we've had numerous things that happened in the industry of alternative power that were very inexpensive, very capable, but what we do is we've, through their own legislation, limited the power companies to being able to charge a certain amount over and above their costs. So when their costs went down, their profit went down, and they couldn't economically operate.
What I would love to ask you about, Pete, before we go into some of the stories that you have to tell, and we have good reason to believe that having spent the best part of 12 hours yesterday talking about a tiny fraction of your experience, I think that we could probably talk literally for days. And what the people watching this video are really concerned about, I think, is what can you help them understand better than they do at the moment about what's really happening on this planet at the moment? What are the agendas of the controllers? How much trouble are we in, and what can people do? And I want to put that question on hold because this is the purpose of this video as far as we're concerned. And there's a whole separate topic, which is a technological topic, because this man we're talking to now has told us about technology that we didn't know existed. And my brain is still reeling over a conversation that we had at breakfast this morning about which I'm going to say nothing. Now, before we start all of that, and that was a wonderful overview that you gave about your intentions, can you give us a little bit of a timeline of your career history, which started when you were very young, a little bit about the kind of things you've been involved in? We're not asking you to name names, but we just want to present you as somebody who people can get some kind of an idea of who this person is that we're talking to, whose name they haven't heard before.
Well, I can do that. Very interesting thing we were talking about. I have no idea where these thoughts came to me, but I know that very early on in life, I was so different from the people around me that I thought that probably I fell from the sky in a titanium egg and landed in my grandfather's orchard, and my parents found me there.
And I think you're probably right, actually, having talked to you for 2 days.
And until I was about 22, I actually believed that.
He is real. He's solid.
He's real, huh?
Then I quit believing that when I was in my mid-20s, and in my last few years, I'm nearly 70, and in my last few years I've started believing that again. Because I find that the people I'm stuck with here on this little spaceship Earth don't seem to have the same view of anything. And it may be that I'm just wacky, but my wackiness has made a lot of products and made a lot of sense to a number of people throughout my life. When, for some reason, probably genetics, because I have on both of my parents' sides, I have long lines of geniuses that extend back in history. And I grew up in a home that was entirely powered and heated and cooled in a very temperate climate, was powered by the sun and by atmospheric pressure change. It was a home that had a gallery inside of it, much like Mexican haciendas, but was covered where we grew all of our meat products in the form of chickens and rabbits and such, and where we grew all of our food products.
So you had an interesting and unusual upbringing.
Had an interesting and unusual upbringing, and we drove in cars that my father made and invented, and we lived in homes that my father built out of strange materials that were very highly insulated. My dad was a pioneer in tilt-up concrete buildings, and was an engineer for the military when in my youth through Second World War.
And you were handpicked and chosen for a special program when you were as young as 13. Is this
yes,
right?
I distinguished myself at age 10 by building a number of rockets that held altitude records, world altitude records, and by inventing a material that's used even today to power solid fuel rockets. That material got out of my hands because I'm not a businessman and wasn't a businessman, and freely gave it away, and other people capitalized on it. But I liked explosions, and so early on started building rockets.
There's a wonderful story that you told us yesterday that we'd love to say again very briefly, and I'm going to be using the word briefly in my questions here with an apology, because we know that you could talk with us literally for days about the extraordinary experiences you have, the things that you know, the things that you've been told, the things that you strongly believe with good reason. But one of the stories that we want you to tell is what happened one day when you were 10 years old with a bunch of adults and you had an extraordinary experience.
Well, that I'll preface that just a little bit with the fact that as I was growing up, it was in a very small town, small country town, about 3 blocks long, and not a lot of people. My parents had a home that had a formal garden, and many of the local people would borrow that for weddings and family reunions and things like that, which my parents gladly lent them the facilities. And there was a wedding that went on, and as I remember, it was kind of in maybe June or July of 1950. And at that point, I had very limited educational resources in this tiny town, but one of the books that got me very, very interested in ancient peoples and anthropology and archaeology was the book that was written about the discovery of King Tut's tomb. And about the time I finished that book, it got me very, very excited to learn about the Egyptians and learn about the technologies that they had and who they were and how they built the pyramids. A lecturer came to town, the man who wrote the book Kon-Tiki, Thor Heyerdahl, and then that got me excited, so I decided I wanted to be an anthropologist, archaeologist, and was dead set on it and reading everything I could get through the state library system on that subject. And along came this wedding, and just about as the preacher was to say the words of destruction to the bride and groom, someone pointed up the sky and said, "What's that?" And everyone turned around. There were about 130 people there, and everyone turned around and looked, and for the next 2 hours, everyone at the wedding watched a series and groups of what I can only call flying saucers flying through the air, some as close as maybe 100 feet and some as far away as maybe 20 miles, put on a spectacular show, and everyone there saw it, as did many people in the surrounding community.
Were they all the same?
No, there were very different ones. Some were the shape of a pencil and seemed to have windows along the periphery. Some were round like a ball. Some were saucer-shaped with a bubble or a dome on top. Some saucer-shaped with 2 or 3 bubbles on the bottom. If you go back and look through the various flying saucer sightings that we've heard about over the years, there was probably one or two of everything we've ever heard about. And these things would dash away, clear out of sight, and come back. They would run away from the people at the wedding party directly, so you were looking just at one spot.
And the significance of this is that at this point you made a major life change, right?
At this point I made a major life change. I decided I was much less interested in King Tut than I was in having my own flying saucer.
Right.
And so immediately started studying science. And so I've studied science ever since, and much of it toward the end of building my own flying saucer. And over the years I came to the conclusion that it was, to build a flying saucer, you really needed to know first how to build what I call a Doctor Who phone booth. And for those who don't know, Doctor Who is a British science fiction spoof that runs on many stations in America about 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. and there have been something like 6 or 7 different Doctor Who's over the years. It's run so long. And Doctor Who had a red British phone booth.
He didn't have a red British phone booth. He had a black police phone box. It was a police phone box.
Ah, okay.
It wasn't a red one.
All right, but he had a two-holer British phone booth, and he would go into it, and it would become a time machine.
It was called the TARDIS.
It was called the TARDIS, and so he was a Time Lord, and he would travel back and forth in both space and time. And so as I tried to figure out how to build a flying saucer, I found out it was easier to build a TARDIS. And then I got thinking, well, who wants to just shove an aerodynamic body through air when you can just simply get somewhere and dial your destination and walk out where you are and you don't have to push anything through the air? So anyway, I worked toward that end and have done many, many science projects, some for large corporations, some for, we'll call them agencies, and many of them for myself. And I'm in the process now at age 69 of building a laboratory to complete the work that I've done, and having acquired a number of very special pieces of equipment for researching such things. And so that's what I'm about right now, and I'm in the process of building that laboratory in a remote location where there are very little man-made magnetic fields. We don't really get television or radio direct much here, and have very, very little man-made interference, electromagnetic interference, and it allows me to do my work that I need to do. And so that's the life change that happened when I was 10 years old, and so I've been on that pursuit ever since.
And we would say be careful what you wish for, because now you have the understanding, as far as you have told us in our conversation so far, you have actually the understanding, if you don't have the factory, to actually be able to make these machines. And you can also confirm that the powers that be on planet Earth actually have access to this technology and use it for all kinds of reasons. Is this correct?
As far as I can tell, there are a number of governments that have this technology. My feeling is, and or my knowledge is, that it's been acquired from people who came to this planet from off-planet, and it's been from the reading of a lot of ancient documents dating back as far as 6,000 years.
To the Sumerians?
To the Sumerians. I have a Sumerian document that's been translated that tells exactly how to build a flying saucer, and it's a direct translation. And it probably doesn't give everything, but it certainly gives the principles. And I've experimented with a number of those principles and find out that things take place that in modern physics aren't possible. And I've worked with a group of scientists that have recently discovered things in both mathematics and science that would lead me to believe that the greater part of science that we have today, and I have a PhD degree in natural philosophy, which they used to call physics, that took a lot of effort to acquire, and it leads me to believe that these ancient documents portray knowledge that we simply don't have, and that the knowledge we do have is wrong.
And you've been privileged to spend time in the Vatican Library. Is this something you can talk about on record?
Probably, well, I can talk about things that there's a lot of information there that is very contrary to things that we believe very deeply, both philosophically and scientifically. And that's basically been held away from the public. It's not common knowledge. A lot of translations, which I think probably came from the remnants of what didn't burn in the Great Library of Alexandria. Some very ancient documents, and I was involved at a time with machine language translation of a lot of that material, which was, in those days, was somewhat crude, but at least it gave us some ideas. And the ones that looked good were later translated by people who had done, lifetime studies of the language, and I think they're pretty fair translations.
Are you able to say about anything that you learned about the Anunnaki, or is this off record as well?
The Anunnaki, who are written about in the Christian and Jewish Bible texts, I've seen skeletons of what we call giants. There have been recent giants. There are people that would travel around with traveling circuses and so forth that were very, very large through genetic problems that they had, genetic errors, and all of them had joint problems. They had organ problems. They died young. The bodies couldn't support the weight, things like that. But some of the skeletons don't show those anomalies that one would see, and they're very well formed. They're very much like our skeletons in many respects, and they were written about in the Bible, and they were written about in other ancient texts. So one has to believe. I know that there were numerous suggestions that DNA tests be run on them once we got DNA testing pretty well down, and I know those have been thwarted by various religions and various school bodies, people not wanting to say that there are things that we don't understand, or that they don't understand, or that they don't want to understand. But we human beings are from ET lineage, are we not? My belief is that, I'll give you an example. Radiocarbon dating has become very, very accurate. And we have very good records of cavemen that didn't have a language. They drew some drew pictures, some didn't. We found caves with their tools in them, with the evidences of their civilization, with their making crude tools and things. And there have been a number of spots that those were found, especially in Africa and Europe and the Middle East. And then all of a sudden, over an 80-year period, emerged a civilization that for 3,000 years had the same language and the same religion and the same writing and the same mathematics. And it was very, very advanced from things that came afterwards. And, in modern history, since, let's say 300 BC, we haven't had any civilization that didn't change the language to where you couldn't read it in a 300-year period.
Yeah. Now, many of the viewers of this video will be aware of the influence on ancient Sumeria, where this fully developed civilization seemed to appear from nowhere. I was just asking whether you can confirm in any way what a lot of people suspect, which is that we actually have been created or engineered by ETs who knew what they were doing and who wanted to create us for special purposes.
Well, I don't have absolute proof of that. That's one reason I'm building the laboratory here. But one of the things I did notice in the late 70s and early 80s, I did a lot of medical equipment engineering, and I designed a machine that would read a field that surrounded the human body and could give you a readout on the condition of the organs, organ by organ in the body, and then it could locate or find or even create a medication that would fix it. And one of the things that I found was in the early beginning that machine could pretty accurately come up with diagnosis rate of 50%. And of course I wanted it to be perfect, and spent a number of years finding out that the reason that I didn't get over 50% was because a lot of people had genetic errors in their genetic system, and as a result of that they had disease processes that were based on those genetic errors. So you had to treat them very differently as people that had a disease that was based on viri or germs or other parasites especially. And so I finally got it to where about 70 to 75% of the diagnoses appeared correct, and the selection of medication treatment appeared correct. And then I thought, well, okay, there's 15% here that I really don't understand. And it was about 10 or 15 years later that we got pretty familiar with and pretty good with genetic testing. And I found that 15% of people had very, very similar sequences in the DNA that were unlike the other 85% of the people, and they were unlike anything else on Earth. They appeared to be alien to the Earth. And so I thought, well, that could be through exposure to some form of solar radiation or some type of ionizing radiation. And so we looked at people that lived in areas that had natural radioactive compounds, like the areas in southern Utah where a lot of the carnotite and other uranium-bearing ores were mined, and people that spent time there, people that were in fallout zones of nuclear testing at the Nuclear Test Center in Nevada. We sent the Gemini capsule up, and it went up, and, well, the first capsule that went up, and so we're all sitting in mission control and called up and, ground to capsule, hello, do you read us? Comes back, and there was dead silence, and everybody laughed because we had the thing, the last guy that went to work had to be the guy that ran for lunch, and right down the street from JPL, right above the Rose Bowl, was like one of the first Jack-in-the-Boxes. And you'd drive in and you'd order, and then they'd repeat the order back, and it'd come back, and you couldn't hear a word. And so everybody realized that these astronauts had taken their turn going and getting lunch, and et cetera, and everybody laughed and thought they were simulating the Jack-in-the-Box effect. It turns out that that's the best communication we had. And so immediately Chris Kraft turns to me and says, Peterson, solve this problem. So I made a thing that we eventually called the lecture laundry, and it was a device that found out why such things took place, and they still take place. We still go to drive-ins and you can't understand a darn thing. But I built some no-noise microphones, but also had a device that removed all of that problem, and we found out there are 3 narrow passbands where all the information of speech is recorded. 2 of them record the information. 1 of them gives you the identification of the speaker. But that 1 passband that gives you the speaker identification has to have a variable frequency start up and drop off. And so you have a little knob on it. So you turn it on in a lecture, and you turn this knob until you can hear the speaker very, very clearly, and you can hear him perfectly. And you don't hear the airplanes go over, the police cars go by, people shuffling their papers, the noise from the cooling fan, the noise from the rear projection fan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, one of the little things out of my life. But I used to build those, and when I moved to build my new laboratory 9 years ago, I quit building those. So that's one of the products I intend to put back in production. I checked to see why I couldn't get the final 15% of the diagnostic readings correct, and finally came to the conclusion that it was because these people had DNA that was had come from off planet, and that led me to think, well, if that's the case, there must be some kind of historical record. And when I went back and looked at the historical record, I found out that there are numerous records and numerous archaeological evidence that we were visited by people from off planet. And very probably, in my opinion, not only off planet, but extraterrestrial or extra solar system type of visitors. And you know, there's so many different people that claim having seen such things, that they existed, seen such peoples. There are several broad categories of such aliens. A small percentage of those could be attributed to anything from paranoia to just tall tales or whatever. But when you have as many as there are, all the way down through all of recorded history, leads one to believe that it probably was very, very true that such things existed. And as an example, anyone who wants to find something from the past, read Ezekiel in the Bible.
Yeah. In the course of your work, have you encountered any documentation about the existence of our relationship with creatures like this?
I have. Most of them I can't talk about.
Sure.
But yes, I've seen things written by scientists that I have very high respect for. Some were teachers of mine. Some were people that I worked with scientifically in other fields. And there were casual conversations about such things. And that's why I have the beliefs that I have, that we have extraterrestrial DNA in our bodies. And some of us do. It's rather interesting to note that there's been a lot of supposition about various programs to reprogram people's minds, to throw their thinking off, to cause them to believe things that aren't necessarily true, but politically would be a very good thing for those in politics and in government and in religion. And it's interesting to note that mind control techniques work on 85% of the people. And the 15% that they don't work well on are people that have that particular DNA string.
Okay.
So another, just another verification that those people are very different from the average person.
Pete, I'm sure we're going to have tons of people wanting to know, of this 15% DNA category, is it all one type of person, like one race, or are they distributed throughout the population? And if you can't tell us, you can't tell us.
No, they obviously run in family trees, along family tree lines or family lines, but they're pretty well distributed throughout all different cultures and races.
Thank you. I thought that was the case.
And which again would be, to me, a confirmation that they probably did happen, because why would someone come and select just one race or one family line?
So this is black and white and
right.
red and Amerindian
red and yellow
and
and green and blue and whatever.
Yep.
How about your DNA? Are you one of those?
As far as I know, I am.
We probably all are in this room.
And we probably all are in this room. As a matter of fact, I've found that as the last 10 or 12 years have progressed, I've noticed that many people, when I talk to about things that I know that are a fact in both science, mathematics, and in history, as well as in my belief system, I talk to certain people, and the 85% that I don't seem to have a medical problem with, i.e. the ones that have quote-unquote normal human DNA.
I don't seem to understand what you're talking about.
When I talk to them, it used to be that they would call me crazy, or it used to be that they'd be more really interested and want to learn about it. But nowadays, when you talk to those people, when you're done talking, they don't say, that's crazy, you're crazy, I don't believe it. They come back into consciousness and start talking like you'd never said a word.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
interesting. And so the people watching this video are probably among the 15%. They're self-selective in many areas.
Well, from what you've told me about the people that you deal with, I would believe that. They're probably in that 15%.
Okay. Now, there's so many places we can go from this conversation, but there's something important which I want to grab here and now, and that is, you made an allusion a few minutes ago to when you moved here 9 years ago to be in a very quiet, secluded place with your laboratory which you're building to do your work. And what can you say about why you are here and why people who are elsewhere might one day wish that they were also here?
Well, that's something that in our talks of the last day or so we haven't really gotten into, but I'm in an area that had two requirements for me and for some of the people who I do various things for that are not to be named, but one of them is this area is very secluded from man-made electromagnetic radiation. It's a deep valley with high mountains surrounding it in 360 degrees. The entrance to it is through a very narrow, long, winding canyon. So we don't really get radio here or television directly, and the power that comes in here does have interference on it as well as it has information on it. But it's very, very secluded informationally, and then the place that I chose here is kind of back in a little notch in the mountains, and so it's even more secluded. So that was one reason. The other reason is it's an area that's very highly defendable. And that was very important because of my belief and the belief of many other people that I have great respect for, that the world is going through I'll call it a meltdown. We're going through a change. The alternative thought, radio and television shows and motion pictures are all, and books and movies are all fraught with the fact that something major is going to happen in 2010 or 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar. Earth changes, a number of things. The Yellowstone caldera is very, very active. There are areas up there where the ground has risen. My understanding is it's risen about 4 feet. We all know that there's got to be major volcanic activity under Yellowstone area because we can go up there and see the mud pots bubbling and Old Faithful geysering and
you get the same
smell the sulfur coming out of Hades.
And metaphorically, the same thing may be happening politically.
Exactly, and the same thing happening politically. We've best I can tell, we've been printing not only billions but trillions of dollars with nothing to back them whatsoever. And right now I have very dear friends in China that are offering me mature T-bills and mature U.S. bonds that they can't seem to get cashed, and that they're offering for 10 cents on the dollar. And they're trillions of dollars worth. It'd be enough that if the world court system would enforce their eventual payment, every man, woman, and child in the United States would have to work for 4 or 5 generations to pay them off.
And what's the connection between that and your being here?
Well, that my being here is I'm in an area that, because of its geographical location, has 4 seasons, but it has a good growing season. The area where I am exports both agricultural and meat product in far greater amounts than the people here would consume. 1 pry bar or 1 stick of dynamite would shut access and not egress particularly, but it certainly would shut access off, so that if there were indeed a failure of the currency and the ensuing political and certainly geopolitical meltdown, this area would be very protected from large groups of people with no money and therefore no food and no energy and whatever. People come looking for food would probably come to an area like this.
Is there anything you can say about your belief of the likelihood of these events transpiring?
I've been led to believe in numerous briefings, and people that I know in fields that very definitely would know and so forth, they've all warned me that I should be at a place like this, and many people, even those from Europe and other places that had very heavy financial connections and major cities around the world, have closed those offices down, and a great number of them have expressed a desire to move here if they haven't already moved here.
When you mean here to this particular area?
Here to this particular area.
Uh-huh. So you believe that there's something very important happening this year, and this is why you're talking. One of the reasons why you're talking to us.
One of the reasons why I'm talking. I've kind of, if you would, come out of the closet, because I think that the people that I find have are the people now that are, say, 27 years old and younger, have gone through a school system that hasn't schooled them, hasn't trained them, and obviously, because if you know anything about education, has very specifically not trained them and not schooled them in political science, certainly, and in politics and in economics and certainly geoeconomics. And they just they don't have an idea of what's going on. And, you know, we look at a president that complained entirely about all the money that the previous president spent, and then in the first 90 days spent 10 times as much. And now it was turned over to the Fed to spend it, and the Fed in congressional testimony on television said, we don't have any idea where that money went. We have no idea. We can tell you where $2 billion of it went, but we certainly can't tell you where $7 trillion of it went or $6 trillion of it went. We don't have any idea. And, you know, the people have just let that pass by. Oh, that means that ourselves and the next 4 generations of progeny are going to have to work their whole lives to pay this debt off, and yet we don't even have any idea where it went or who has it. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly not out there helping the economy.
Mm-hmm. Now, if this occurs, would this be a worldwide problem?
Well, it is a worldwide problem.
Okay.
I mean,
like the collapse of the
look back at James Burke's programs on connections. And the thing of it is this is my opinion, but the unions had to do something to get the union members to pay their dues, and the only thing they really could do was increase their salaries, so the unions have increased their salaries to a point where the work has had to move offshore, because we don't have people who are willing to work and be blue-collar workers anymore. They want to work and get white-collar wages. The white-collar people want to get white-collar wages rather than wages that were consistent with their production. So in essence, they've stolen from the blue-collar workers and stolen from the rest of the world by loaning them money and then taking all their natural resources at very low rates. So this has happened all over the world. It hasn't just happened here. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing economies beginning to fail everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we've been dealing with a system now for 70 years or better of fiat money that's backed with nothing. Mm-hmm. And it's like was said about the Irish when they moved into New York and into Boston. Everybody made money by taking in the neighbor's wash.
Mm-hmm. Sure. In your personal opinion, and if you can qualify that personal opinion, it would be useful. What do you think may happen if there's some tipping point of social instability or financial instability that occurs before the end of this year?
Well,
what can people expect?
Let's take a look at the the Depression of in the late 20s. People had ethics. They had morality. Ethics and morality were removed from the school systems 25 years ago, and for specific reasons. It had nothing to do with reasons of ethics or morality. It had to do with political reasons. So they were taken from the school systems. So in the 20s, when we had a depression, people would go out to farmland and knock on the farmer's door and say, "Ma'am, I got 3 little kids that need to eat, and I'll shovel manure, I'll dig potatoes, I'll hoe the weeds out of the garden, I'll do whatever I need to do to get something to feed my kids." Now what people have been taught is that they're owed a living, they're owed to live like television says that people should live, and they don't have an ethic, they don't have a morality. And so what happens is if we have a financial collapse, it won't be like the 20s. It's going to be like today, and you're going to have anarchy and absolute chaos. And the government knows that. They've recently asked the service members if they would fire on civilians if they were asked to, which is entirely against the Constitution. We had a Second Amendment, and the founders of our country, in writing after the Constitution about where the Second Amendment came from, didn't say that we should have the right to keep and bear arms so that we could go get a deer and feed the family. They specifically stated we had the right to keep and bear arms so that if the government, with its military, got out of hand and tried to suppress the Constitution of the civilians, they could take control back, because the government was supposed to lie in the hands of the people. Mm-hmm. Now, not that I believe that the people are smart enough to handle themselves, because they're not. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the last several presidents that we've had. We'd have actually had senators and congressmen thrown out because they wouldn't do for mm-hmm. us what was necessary. Mm-hmm. And the senators and congressmen had no option, because we had so many splinter groups that they had to keep satisfied that they couldn't do what was necessary for the people as they were charged to do.
Is there anything you can say on record about a recent congressional session that you attended?
Yes. Probably better not said.
Okay.
But just note that there was the third, my understanding it was the third ever closed session of Congress.
Okay. I understand.
But
and
it is on Google, so...
I think many things have leaked out about it on Google. Mm-hmm. We found that no matter where the politician was and what committee he was on, when top secret things were talked about, they wanted to close the session early so they could get out and put their tips out to the news. So we don't have any confidentiality in that, so it leaked out, I'm sure.
And am I right in assuming that you wouldn't contradict those leaks?
I wouldn't contradict them at all.
Thank you.
But weren't they told to, weren't some of them getting out of the country to relocate in South America? Ask them that.
That's my understanding.
Because George Green has given us testimony to that effect.
Yeah. That's my understanding, that a number of them felt that once the people found out what had been done to them by their representatives, they felt that it would be much better for their health and safety to be somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of says it all. Do you know anything or suspect anything about, once the financial system fails, if it does so, what would it be replaced by?
Well, up until a few days ago, I would say it would have been replaced by a world currency. Remember, the last 4 presidents have all been members of the Council of Foreign Relations, and have openly stated that they're moving toward a one world government, and believe we should have a one world government. If we had a one world government, we'd probably have a one world currency. And it might even be they were smart enough to have a currency that was backed by something real, like gold or silver or various metals. I've always wanted to see a commodity-backed currency. So you could have a currency that was worth so much corn or so much wheat or so much something that was a real tangible thing.
Up until a few days ago, you said.
Up until a few days ago.
What changed?
What changed was, my understanding is now that the NAFTA and GATT agreements basically put us into a system where we had Mexico, United States, and Canada almost as one government with three parts. And there was going to be, it's been highly rumored that there was a printed currency available, pictures available on the internet, et cetera, because there's nothing that's a secret anymore. That would have currency, different colors and different sizes for different denominations, and was to be called something like the Amero for North America. Mm-hmm. It's been rumored that that currency is being destroyed now and replaced by another U.S. currency that is being printed, and that would make a lot of sense because there's so much, the money that's being printed is funny money because it's backed on nothing, but also there's been so much counterfeiting, especially out of Iran, and so you can look at some of our politics with Iran having to do with nuclear proliferation, and so much of it having to do with the fact that they have good printing presses and good duplicators of paper and ink. Mm-hmm. And there's been a tremendous amount of currency that we know has moved here from Iran that is counterfeit. Okay. And it's rampant.
Yeah. Many people watching this video will be aware of what David Icke has been talking about. And we spoke to him at length earlier on this year, and one of the drums that he's been beating is about what he feels is the danger of the population being chipped as a means of control, which is going to be linked with their ability to operate financially at all. Can you comment on that at all?
There are a number of things to lead one to believe that they are going to be shipping people around. Mm-hmm. There are a number of places that there's no explanation for, but very large concentration camps have sprung up. One of them very near where I live here, that's very large sized. And on the other hand, I was involved back in the 70s with a very large food and feed company to build chips that could be used on prize cattle and breeding cattle, for example, and show cattle, to geolocate them or to identify them. And that technology has now been reduced down to things that can be injected through a hypodermic needle and in the body and identify people. And the currency that I'd heard about that was to be a one world currency was based on being chipped, and the credits, if you would go onto and off of that chip by a method similar to Bluetooth that's used today.
And this is technology which you yourself have helped develop, is that what I heard you say?
Well, it's technology that had developed some of the early things, and it's technology which, in its smaller implementation, I'm using right now in a product that I'm in the process of building for geolocation and anti-theft, because there's so many people being kidnapped and sacrificed for their organs, or being kidnapped and held for ransom, not the least of which is around Mogadishu area and in the Mediterranean, but also even in Mexico. A tremendous number of people being kidnapped for ransom there, both their own people and visitors.
There's a problem tracking containers.
Problem tracking sea land containers as well.
Why is it important to track these containers?
Well, there are around 10,000 containers a day coming into the country that are never physically inspected. And we know that weapons of mass destruction, though this is not totally announced, but we know weapons of mass destruction are coming in those containers. We know terrorists are coming in those containers because we see the evidence of it afterward. And thank God the government has picked up a lot of these things later. But the containers, and a lot of them are shipping contraband. A lot of them are shipping, we saw the dog food come in that was laced with melamine because it wasn't inspected.
Now, we just did a tape change here, and just before that little interlude, David was very keen to ask Pete about his view about how can we transform these danger signs into something that is a healthy warning to us, and what sorts of proactive, positive thinking, responsible actions can we take without just blindfolding ourselves and ignoring whatever real risks there might be there. Now, this is my bridge because I want David to ask his own question. This is one of the reasons why he's here with us. We have a huge respect for David, his intellect, his perspective, his experience. And David, this is all yours. You want to talk to Pete about this very important thing here.
Sure. What I wanted to say was just that I have a perspective which includes documenting my dreams every day for the last 17 years, following their guidance, getting accurate information from that guidance. Yesterday morning, while we were talking about all these things, I had a dream in which there was a volcanic eruption. It looked terrifying. There were rocks flying into the air, and everybody around me thought we were all going to die. We ran under these trees. The rocks fell all around us, but we were all fine. Nobody was actually hurt by it. Obviously, it was a disaster. Obviously, it caused property damage, but the people were okay. And that's one of many different varieties of data that I've gotten to suggest that even though things look like they could be really austere and apocalyptic, that humanity will persevere through this, and that we will be able to have a positive outcome on our own future, and that this is not a situation that's completely outside of our ability to manage.
Well, David, you had a question that you asked me just before the break, and I think we're going to agree, but
okay.
Go ahead and ask that question again, or make that statement again.
It was a very good question. It was about prior warnings not having come to pass, and
okay,
therefore
yeah.
Why should we be concerned?
Yeah, let me give you some prelude to that. I spoke with another witness who was involved in various compartmentalized projects, one in particular which was at the Montauk base. And he had extensive contact with people on the inside. And one of the things that he said was that the superdomes that were built in all the major cities were intended to be large holding containers for people to be herded in. And he said that there was a plan that the Rodney King riots would foment enough social upheaval that they would be able to actually round up black people who were rioting in the cities and put them inside these domes and basically keep them in there until they passed away. And that was a plan that was made, and it obviously did not happen. And so we've heard from many Project Camelot witnesses similar plans, timelines in which the powers that be, whoever they are, say apocalyptic things are going to happen. The dates come, strange things happen, yes, but it doesn't lead to an apocalypse scenario. So in private conversation with us, you had mentioned that there were other dates that came and went where they had said something like this might happen. They told you, some friends of yours inside told you something like that, and then it didn't actually turn into a social breakdown.
Yes.
Okay.
I did say that, and so the question is?
Well, the question is, in terms of, you had mentioned before that people have a conditioning to not think, and a conditioning of mind control. And you said that there is a degradation in the moral fabric of our society. So I think what we really need to know on a personal level is, what can we do to help ourselves not be indoctrinated by this passive programming that's coming out to us? And you mentioned aversions of mind control and things like that. I think that's an important key to not getting stuck in this trap.
I moved here because I was told by various people that I should geolocate and be in an area that would be safe when we eventually got a financial and therefore political collapse. And so there are certain things that I've done to make sure that myself and my family and my friends are safe from that. The question that David just asked is a little bit different, having to do with the fact that numerous ones of us have heard a bit apocalyptic things in the future, ranging from the fact that supposedly in the year 2011 or 2012 we have the end of the Mayan calendar and we have an apocalypse coming. People who are apocalyptic Christians say about the same thing, that the end times are here or coming. We've heard very, very dire things about the economic posture of the United States and the whole world, and we see things happening. We see Iceland, for example, declaring bankruptcy, and I hear from people that I know in the banking system that a number of the European states are going to follow them in bankruptcy, and when the U.S. currency fails, which I can't imagine that it won't, because we've printed so much currency and put out there that's backed by nothing, it's all beginning to come home and roost. The T-bills and the bonds are coming back to us, and I can't see what's going to happen there. We have the huge collapse that when before the current president took office, $16 million was going to solve all the problem, and please get this bill through, and we can take $16 million and put it out in, and it barely passed, and we got that through, and then it seemed like 3 weeks later we didn't know where the $16 billion was even supposed to go or what for, because they passed the bill without even knowing what was going to happen. That $16 billion disappeared immediately, and now all of a sudden we needed $7 or $9 trillion, and then we needed 20, and so we don't have any idea where that went. And so the things we've heard in the past about there going to be a failure, the time came and left and there wasn't a failure, but this money was pumped somewhere, and of course the system had a lot more inertia than we anticipated. So now what we have is something that the actuality is coming to roost. I drive around in the town that I live nearby, the large town. It's about 50 miles south of me. And drive around there, and I look in the little malls, and I look in the big malls. The big mall has closed. We only had one mall in the town, and it's a gross population, nearly 750,000 people. And the one mall that we had, the people who had the mall failed and went bankrupt, and it's closed. All the stores that sell non-essential items, jewelry stores, bed and bath stores, etc., most of them have closed. Sporting goods stores, most of them have closed.
What you're saying is that we haven't been here before.
So we haven't really ever been here before. We've heard that things are going to happen, things are going to fail, but life continued on as normal, and the government continued to print money and pass it out to its friends and so forth. And so therefore, we're in a bit different set of circumstances. I moved here in 1999 because I was told by 2001 that the system was going to fail. And here we are 8 years later, or 9 years later.
In fact, you were ordered to come here.
I was. And so we found out that no, it didn't fail. And I'd go for a briefing, and there'd just be a shock. We don't understand it. We don't have any idea why it hasn't failed. I mean, we just don't know. The only thing we can do is say there was so much inertia. Mm-hmm. So now it's beginning to fail, and it isn't just beginning to fail. It's increasing on a logarithmic scale, and very shortly I see that it just about has to do that. Which then brings us back to the first question that David asked just before the break was, what do I see that we could offer the listeners out there, something that they might do? And I can say, well, in my personal opinion and what I've done, I put my money and my talent, my skills, and my abilities where my mouth is. I've come here and I'm self-sufficient. I grow all my own meat, all my own vegetables. I have stored up those things that are going to be critical to society. I picked up the tools that I didn't have that allow me to do things in such an environment, in such a society, to produce things that are going to be necessary for people to have.
And you can even make your own radio and probably fuel your own truck.
Exactly right. And I have a number of vehicles that I now have engines that'll burn alcohol. I have the equipment, and I have the seeds, and I have the tractor, and I have the land, and I have the water to grow material that I can make alcohol from at a much larger rate than I need.
Now, a lot of people listening to this will say, but I'm in the middle of a big city and I've got a wife and a mortgage and 2 kids who are at school, and I hear what you're saying, but what can I do? I'm not in that situation. What would you tell them?
Well, I've taught survival for better than 40 years. And my particular area of expertise in survival was urban survival. And I was asked to write a book about urban survival, and I started the book out, and I can tell you that, and we got into that a little bit earlier, I can tell you that today there isn't any such thing as urban survival. Who knows their neighbors? In 29, people knew their neighbors and they had ethic and morality. Now the ethic and morality has been taken away from the children, and the children are now in their 20s and 30s.
The community's gone.
The community is gone. We don't have a community that would do that, and we have people that have children, and now some of them have a couple children. What are you going to do when your kids say, Daddy, my tummy hurts, I haven't had anything to eat for 2 weeks, and you smell the next door neighbor over there who was a wise squirrel and put something up, and you smell him out on his barbecue because he's got no power but charcoal, cooking a couple of freeze-dried steaks. And you have to ask yourself, what would that person do?
Okay. But there are a lot of psychological operations that have been put in place in preparation for all of this. And there's mental self-defense, or mental preparation, emotional preparation, spiritual preparation. Is there something that you can speak to about that, whatever people's circumstances are?
I will do that, but first I want to suggest that take a look at the things that have happened. Forget the political, economic situation. Let's take a look at things that have happened in this country over the last, say, 4 or 5 years. You've got the debacle that occurred in New Orleans, and then you've got the next debacle that occurred in Texas and Mississippi. And you got to see that, no, all those people couldn't leave town because they got out on the freeway, and the freeway was jammed, and everybody got stopped, and they ran out of gas, and there wasn't any gas. The people that owned the service stations left to get out of town also, so there wasn't anything for the service stations. You look at New Orleans, it was, I knew people that were getting water to New Orleans that had been ordered a year. It was a year until it got delivered. There were people who got thousands and thousands of trailer houses that were stuck in the Midwest and never got shipped down there. Nobody got to use them. But by the time they got where they could have put them down there, the things had already decayed, and they found out they were made with the wrong materials, and they were outgassing toxic things.
Yep.
That was how well the government was prepared for that, and they saw it coming and saw it coming and saw it coming. Nothing happened. Then you look at the people that live along the Mississippi River and its feeding tributaries, and they've had floods virtually every year, and every year they have floods, and they go back and rebuild their houses with lots of insurance money, and then they have floods the next year. We have, the weather is changing, and I think it's changing to the colder rather than the warmer, but anyway, the weather is changing very definitely. It's changing right here where I live, tremendously so. And the last couple winters, we've had 2 to 3 times the snow that we had the previous 10 years. And then we've had water from it, the major water problems. We had droughts for a number of years, and I live near a huge reservoir that holds enough land to irrigate the whole southern state a year or two, and it's been absolutely dry in the bottom, hardly a trickle, and now it's clear full and spilling over.
So in summary, you're saying that as a scientist, as an intelligent man, as somebody who's well connected on the inside with other scientists and other intelligent men, you think that there's a real problem? I
think that there's a major real problem, and I think that people who don't see that and don't realize that simply have put blinders on. And I think that what they should do is think, maybe there's something to this, but at least we see that in major areas of the country, there have been problems where people needed to have a little supply of food left because they couldn't get to a store. They need to have things that if they have to leave their home, like in the area that I'm in, and in California especially, and in other states especially. There have been major fires that have gone on. People have been moved out of their homes, and when they left their home, they came back and they're crying on television, "Oh, everything's gone, everything's gone." And yet some of those people went to survival lectures that I gave, and they had copies of their driver's license, copies of their marriage license, copies of their insurance papers, copies of all the things they needed to have copies of. They had extras of all the children's pictures and extras of the journals and so forth put away in another location. And these are things that people can do to assure continuity even though there may be something come. California, we hear predictions about earthquakes all the time, and we see earthquakes all the time. And some are small and some are larger, but we hear the people that actually are predicting those things predicting very large earthquakes. They don't know it's going to be next year or the year after, but they know it's going to come. They know it's going to be large. They know people are going to lose things. Why don't these people have what's called a bug-out bag in their car where they can take off and leave the area? The government says, oh, you only need to have 3 days storage. But we look at where the government's come in time after time after time over the last 4 or 5 years and found out the government didn't have anything for them. Mm-hmm. They had to fend for themselves. And it was months sometimes before they had effort come in. It's very interesting to understand. When I teach a survival class, one of the things I do is right at the beginning of the class I put a velvet bag over people's head. And then I tell them I'm going to place a $10 gold piece somewhere in the room and have you all look for it. And whoever finds it gets to keep it. And so I do that, and then I say, okay, go look for it, and immediately someone says, oh, here it is, I have it, I found it. And everybody takes their bag and says, well, that's no fair, he didn't have a hood on. And I say, okay, so let's say that there's a big earthquake or a big emergency. And if you don't have a way of communicating, because the cell phones are going to be down, the radio stations are going to be down, if you don't have a way of communicating outside of those, it's like having a bag over your head. You're not going to know what roads are blocked. You're not going to know what roads have police that are not allowing people to go through. You're not going to have gasoline in your car. If you had a shortwave radio or an amateur radio, which are very inexpensive, you could listen to the radio amateurs who are going to be immediately there because that's what they're set up for, that's what they're trained to do. And if you had an amateur radio license, which anybody can get these days, it's like you had eyes. You can see where to go, where there's problems, where there are not problems, where there are riots, where there are not riots, and carry on and go there. If you had a bug-out bag in your car, you'd have gas and fuel and medical supplies and things to keep you warm, things to keep you cool, all packed up, ready to go, just a small bag. So there are a number of things that one could do to become aware.
But there's a lot that has been done to dumb down the population. And how can this be reversed? How can that be aided? I want to make sure that David gets a chance to answer his own questions. What I'm trying to do is to support you in that, and I want to give you airtime here.
There is a compartment of reality that we can talk about in which people are on this planet and there are forces that appear to be almost outside their control to do anything about other than, as you said, preparations for the sake of survival. Then we also have another context, which is that you are apparently directly aware of extraterrestrials who are not strictly negative. In fact, you mentioned to us before that a lot of them are positive. And we know they're out there, we know they're visiting us. And while I don't believe they're going to just come down and save us from problems, there appears to be a greater reality that we are all involved in, and that this situation, my understanding is that the situations we're going through are going to be instrumental in helping to purge the negative influences on this planet that have been prevailing for so long, not make them worse. There will be certainly a crisis time that we go through, but that's part of a passage into a more organized and enlightened society. That's how it's been explained by many different accurate sources, in my opinion, including ancient prophecies that speak of the coming of a golden age.
Well, one of the things that I did in studying survival was I went to numerous places on the face of the earth where there were survival type things taking place, whether it be genocide in Africa, whether it be eruption of volcanoes, whether it be tornadoes and tsunamis. I've gone to those places studying survival, and I know one thing. There's one person I can rely on, and that's me. And all the rest is conjecture. I found out that the people that survived were the people that were prepared, and some were prepared mentally, and that's the major preparation that you could do. But I know that when you believe in other people, that may or may not happen, but if you believe in yourself and follow up, it does happen. And you don't have any worry. And I found out that a few days or a few hours or even a few minutes can be the difference between life and death. And so I would just as soon spend a little time and a little effort and a little money and be able to take care of myself and my people. And if other things happen, so much the better. I have things I can share with others.
Yeah, I don't dispute that at all. In fact, I am very well prepared for eventualities in myself. We also at Project Camelot have interviewed enough different witnesses that we are trying to look at the big picture perspective, and I do believe that we have an intelligently guided planet. I do believe that the things that happen on the planet are not random, and I do believe that society itself is going through an evolutionary process. And a lot of the things that you shared with us already off the record revealed that there are potentials of the human being much greater than what we currently understand. You've also suggested that there are efforts to suppress our natural ability that have been put in place. And I think that while absolutely preparing is important, I think anything you can tell us about how people can strengthen their intuitive faculty so that they have an ability to get in touch with that part of themselves that does have the knowledge. You've mentioned remote viewing before, too. If they have some way, something you can share with us, a way in which people can greater empower themselves to the greater awareness that they actually possess, and how that could help them through these transitional times. I think that would be important to hear.
Well, actually, strangely enough, we really agree. And I think we're both saying that one should do both, because then you don't have to rely on anything. You don't have to rely on somebody else. And that's the problem. What's been taken out of people over the last 20 years is responsibility. People have to take responsibility. And if you look at over the millennia, the people that we've considered major prophets, such as the prophets of Mohammedanism, prophets of Christianity, prophets of records such as Nostradamus, and so forth. Every one of those and all the religions have said, take responsibility and prepare yourself. And it's the things that David's talking about to prepare are exactly correct. People should have those skills. They should go out and practice those. And I know that your group has been superb in providing evidence and providing a website that's a fantastic website where they can go and look and find out people that are talking about such things, people that are saying such things. I'm basically a warrior because that's kind of my path. And I've noticed that there isn't anybody out there in this world that's taking care of me except me. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily true because the knowledge, the intellect, the experience, the vast experience that I have has been handed to me on a silver platter. It's like I stuck my hand in the air to volunteer and got a hiccup in my rotator cuff and my hand just stayed up and I ended up volunteering for everything. And Everybody thought I was volunteering, and so I got stuck into a number of different things, but none of it, as I look back on it, was by accident. And I know that there are a number of people that were students of mine that were in New Orleans, that were in the Gulf area of Texas, that were in the river areas in Ohio and Nebraska and so forth, and Tennessee. And I know that all of them, when the time came, just simply threw a bag in the back of their car and headed out, and they were fine, and all their family records were preserved, and all their family jewels and things, everybody knew where they were. They were all in one place, threw them in the car, off they went. The car was full of gas with a little trailer with a couple gas cans and a tent, and they were fine. And I'm just suggesting that that is a very wise thing to do in the day like today. Whether the prophets of doom are correct or whether they're not correct, let's say you put aside 5 months worth of food. Well, go take a look at the prices in the store and the prices 5 months ago and tell me you wouldn't like to buy 5 months ago's food, or today's food at 5 months ago's prices. You know, it's better than any investment you could have made. It's better than any stock I know of. It's even better than gold. And if a disaster comes, it's going to be worth far more than gold, because it'll save your life, where gold will just get you robbed, or silver. And I tell people, if you're going to save gold, for crying out loud, save some silver, because if we have a collapse, when it comes, get yourself a wheelbarrow, and if you come to my place and want a loaf of bread and you've got an ounce of gold that's worth, at that time, $2,000, I'll swap it for a loaf of bread. And if you got a quarter that by that time is worth $3, a non-numismatic silver quarter, I'll swap it for a loaf of bread. Take your pick.
Right.
So there are things that people can do to do that, and there are things that they can do. There are a number of remote viewing courses, and many of them are very good. I'd suggest you do remote viewing. But I said, besides remote viewing, I know one thing that's certain. I can take my little ham radio, and I can pick it up, and I can call on the ham radio repeater, and I say, what's the traffic like on Route 17 going out through Palmdale? And somebody's going to say, oh, all the cars are stopped and they're not letting people through. Or they're going to say, oh, the traffic's flowing just fine, and I know that's the direction to get out of town.
Sure. A lot of people would want us to ask this question. It's almost a matter of duty, and that is, how much does Obama know about all of this, in your opinion?
That's a strange question. I can't imagine anyone accepting the job of president with the current situation. I can't imagine that. So, in that respect, I have to say he can't be very intelligent. On the other hand, he's an intelligent man. He certainly is an intelligent speaker. And of course, he was a debate king, if you would. And I know that when he got his first briefing, because I had friends that were present, said that he was so shocked that he had to sit down when he found out what really was happening. This was before he took the office. Now I think that he's found himself in a river that's flooded and headed south, and he's got a little boat with no oars.
And very steep canyon walls.
And steep canyon walls, and he's just paddling with his hands as fast as he can paddle, and trying to do the very best job that he can. He's has a few really good people around him, and I don't think that I really don't believe he has a hint how to stop what's happening. I don't think he has a hint how to stop the flood, because it's behind him, and it's coming on, and he's being driven by it, and there's not much he can do.
Now, speaking about having good people with him, just using that turn of phrase, would you confirm that there are good people who we have euphemistically called the white hats in the government and the intelligence and in the military, who themselves are patriots as you are, and are trying to do their best from the inside to avert these things?
Absolutely. There are many people that left the military. Most of the good people left during Clinton and Bush because they couldn't pledge allegiance to the president because of the things that were being done. So many people left. On the other hand, there were many people that stayed behind because they knew they were going to be needed, and they sacrificed not principle, but they had a higher knowledge and stayed behind so that they could apply the knowledge that they had when the time came.
That's where they thought they would be most valuable.
That's where they thought they would be most valuable, and they were the true patriots because they did what was best for the people rather than what was best for themselves.
And these are the people who are keeping you informed sometimes, is that
Some of
right?
those people are the people who are keeping me informed.
I understand.
I mean, it's more that they're keeping me informed because they call me for ideas, and I'm kind of an idea man, and they call me and ask me what might we do here and what might we do there.
Because you're above all a problem solver and a technological...
I'm basically a problem solver.
Do you think there's ever going to be a disclosure that any of this stuff about UFOs or other races not born on Earth would ever get out to the public?
Well, I think it's interesting. I've been told that a number of the apocalypse films that have come out recently and a number of the science fiction things that have come out recently as movies have been partially funded by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting to get familiar in our minds the idea there might be people that could come and help us. There might be some kind of divine providence that would help as well. And I've heard kind of through the grapevine that I know that Reagan was asked to disclose such things, the truth about flying saucers and alien people. I know that JFK was asked those things and said he would do something, and I know there was pressure put to bear on both of them to say nothing. I know that the current president, I don't know this, I have heard that the current president was planning to make such announcements later in the year or late in the year.
Mm-hmm.
And whether...
Are you willing to say the date when you and that information that you
no,
got?
I know date I was told, and I can tell you the same people that told me that date told me that the U.S. currency would fail in 2001 when they ordered me to move here.
Okay.
So who knows what's going to happen, but I've heard that that his desire, and I may be wrong, I don't know. I've heard it through the grapevine. A man hasn't told me himself.
Mm-hmm.
And
He's under orders, isn't he? He's just the front guy.
My feeling is that we haven't had a president since right after George Washington that wasn't under orders from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back and take a look at it, it's pretty obvious.
And then if the guy doesn't obey those orders, then he may find himself in trouble.
May find himself in trouble.
Uh-huh.
And you want to talk about who's behind him at all?
I really don't.
Okay.
Well, about the announcement, though, you were working up to an announcement. You were saying that he may announce something at the end of the year. What would that be? What does your grapevine tell you?
My grapevine tells me that he was going to announce that that there are indeed such things as flying saucers, and there is indeed technology transfer, and there is indeed beings behind it that didn't come from this planet.
And how many different kinds?
We're getting into speculation here that,
Understand.
whether the person that told me would know, I have no idea. Whether the president would know, I have no idea. Whether we even know, I have no idea.
Sure.
But a number of them, more than say 3 or 4.
Good.
And then if you go, if you go back and look at the number of people who seem to have seen such people, you get kind of there's a reptilian type, and there's a long-faced type, and a round-faced type, and a tall type, and a short type, and but you get, it isn't just like one person said this and one person says that. It's 50 people in the U.S. and 20 people in Germany and 300 people in Brazil and 80 people in Africa say this.
Yeah.
And then for the next bunch, there's maybe 40 or 50 in Russia and 25 or 30 in Germany. And, you can't discount all of those things when from totally disparate regions that have no real communication and people have no real communication with each other, You hear people doing exact descriptions
Yeah.
and large amounts of exact descriptions.
And tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, reporting contact with the little guys with the almond-shaped eyes and the big heads,
Right.
who many people say are responsible for abductions. Do you know anything about that at all?
All I know is that I've talked to a number of those people, and many of them seem to me to be very credible. Many of them seem to me to have read somebody else's report, and then they wanted to be in the thing and made it up.
Okay. Are any of these abductions military operations?
I wouldn't have any idea.
You don't know? Okay.
Look, I can't see why the dollar didn't crash in 2001. Absolutely couldn't see why it didn't crash. Because it was backed with nothing. And it was inertia, in my opinion, it was inertia only that carried it on. And sure, there were a lot of people behind the scenes manipulating various things. You saw how they manipulated billions and billions of dollars that didn't even, not only were bogus dollars, i.e. dollars that were printed with nothing behind them, dollars that didn't even exist. I mean, people fail to look at this fact. If let's say, and we'll use just round figures, let's say that there's $1,000 issued. Okay, who issues the dollars? The Fed issues the dollars, totally outside of the Constitution as far as I'm concerned. The Fed issues $1,000. Let's say they then rent those dollars to the bank. What does the bank do? The bank rents those dollars out to people so they can buy a car, a home, whatever. And they say, we'll rent this out to you and it'll be at 5% interest. Now what that means is they've taken $1,000 and they can, if they have $1,000, the banks are allowed to loan out $17,000. So you have, let's say you have 10% interest on $17,000. So now that's $10,000 plus another $7,000. Where does the $7,000 come from to pay it back? It wasn't ever issued. It didn't ever exist.
Yeah.
How can they pay back more than there ever was? And people don't understand the concept of, fiat money.
Yeah,
Right.
it will be.
There are many videos on Google that people can watch on this very subject and get educated.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is that people have been taught if you just stick your head in the sand and don't look, it isn't going to bite you.
And keep on watching American Idol and you'll be all right.
And keep on watching American Idol and keep on going to the movies and keep on, whatever.
I'd like to say one thing. There is footage that you can see of an announcement that Rumsfeld made on September 10th, 2001, about money that was lost in the military budget to the tune of $2.3 trillion the day before September 11th. So is that in any way related to what you're talking about with the year 2001?
Probably is, and there are a number of other things. Let's look what happened on September 11th. A building that wasn't even involved crashed to the ground, and in the basement of it was stored a massive amount of gold. It was never found. Okay, never found. And why would that building fall down? Not even ashes fell on it. It was out of the wind pattern.
Right.
Where did that money go, and why did that building fall down?
Well, do you know the answer?
I think I know the answer, but I don't know that I'm convenient with giving that answer because, I don't want to prompt somebody to go look for it because I know what I feel they'd find. I think what they'd probably find is an early grave.
By now, people watching this video will understand why we were so keen to introduce Pete to this audience, and will understand what we were saying when we referred to 12 hours of off-record conversation yesterday that we haven't even begun to bottom out even so. And what we're able to provide here is only a very short summary of some of the things which Pete knows. And so, with apologies, we're going to move on, because we've only got a certain amount of time and a certain amount of tape, to other areas, because there's an extraordinary amount of experience and information which you may want to share. And let me first of all ask you, if you're willing to share any of your experience about working with Russian scientists and in what capacity you did that.
Yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. Some of it at least. After the fall of the wall, I went to Russia and worked with a number of top scientists there that were involved in their space program.
And you went to Russia, let me say euphemistically, in a professional capacity?
Yeah, in a professional capacity. And I came by invitation and went there. One of the things we did was we took, and I'm going to use Russia in general terms, meaning the old Soviet Union. I went to
the USSR.
Various countries that were at one time part of the USSR. And I was there, for example, when Ukraine declared their independence. Mm-hmm. And I knew the man who was the first president there. And so we took out of the USSR a lot of technology that had been pent up and brought back and donated it to the government here. And I got to see brilliant technology that some we knew about, some we had, and some we didn't have. Specifically in material science and in things that could be used to generate alternative energy, new ways of building motors, new types of materials for building motors and spacecraft, motors and spacecraft, new ways of storing electricity in capacitors, which would be very handy in making electric automobiles, meaning that you could take all the energy that normally is sent to the air as heat in braking and put that energy into a capacitor device, which would then bleed off into a battery and recharge the battery of the car to a certain extent.
Did the technology behind the Aurora come from the Russians?
No. That technology was invented specifically right here in the United States by a scientist that in my memory, worked for General Dynamics for a period of time, and probably worked for Rocketdyne or General Atomic for a period of time. Remember, General Atomic was highly disturbed when Lyndon Johnson refused to give them any more government contracts unless they'd move from San Diego to Texas.
But the Aurora's been mothballed anyway, because that's old technology anyhow.
I would assume that.
Okay.
But it was a technology where you spray gas out through a surface and then explode the gas, mix it with oxygen, and explode it. And it was like push shooting a pumpkin seed. The pressure external would push against it and push it forward at very high rates of speed.
Okay.
And very efficient.
Okay. So that was our 60-second soundbite about the Aurora, which is worth an interview in itself. But go back to what you feel that we learned from the Russians, because we had some fascinating conversations about this.
Well, we learned an awful lot about material science. There was a man by the name of I.M. Franchevich that was a believer in quantum physics, and so he wouldn't hire anybody. This was in the late 50s or mid-50s. He wouldn't hire anybody for his institute that didn't absolutely believe in quantum physics. So a lot of the work they did was based on quantum physics, and we hadn't quite decided whether that was real or not. And whether it was real or not, they came up with a lot of things that were very interesting. Additionally, they were doing a lot of research work in such areas as remote viewing and telekinesis and such things, and we learned a lot. We brought a number of people out from there that taught us things, and this was a very interesting thing that happened in the Soviet Union. If you look at their government, it's kind of a three-branch party system that You have the people from industry, the people from government, and the people from the political pedagogy that so that the vote, to get the full vote, you had to have someone vote that it wasn't in violation of Stalinist-Leninist political dogma. And a lot of science was definitely outside of Stalinist-Leninist political dogma. And therefore the scientists were very frustrated, and so there was a lot of information they were willing to give out because their government had told them it was baloney anyway, so why not give it away? They wanted to see their ideas and thoughts utilized. And secondly, there were a lot of them that one way or another snuck out and came to work for the West and brought a lot of very good information, including a lot of the very basic things that were happening in what we'll call psychic phenomena or mental talents. It really isn't that. It's actually a definite science, and there's a lot of technology that's behind it, and we hear a lot of stories about that from the government, a lot of past history that's much of it disinformation, and we're told that, well, we learned a few things from it, but it wasn't particularly good, and I think that that's very wrong because I know it was particularly very good. And I can't imagine that they're not using that kind of technology. Additionally, we learned a tremendous amount of things about outer space technology. We learned a lot about the amount of radiation that you find in outside the ionosphere and the problems that causes. We had some problems with our early astronauts because we didn't know what was there. And noticed there were several lulls in our space program as we found out new things and then geared up to take into account the malevolence of outer space. And out of that came a lot of conjecture that there was way too much radiation for us to have had people in outer space. And one of the things that very much interested me was when the Mir space station was crashing and they were worried about the fact that it had a little radioactive material on it that might cause problems on Earth, and they didn't know exactly where it was going to fall. But one of the things the Soviets announced, and one of the things I do is I listen to shortwave, because when you listen to shortwave you hear about the same event, the same people, the same place, the same time, and a completely different story of what went on there. So the press in the United States is either completely ignorant or it's completely controlled as far as I can tell. But one of the things the Soviets did was announce the weight of the Mir station. And when you look at that weight, you find out it was about 5,600 shuttle loads of material. And they didn't launch that much. We didn't launch that much. And so why would the Mir weigh as much as it did? And the explanation is, which you can find out for yourself if you merely take a sensitive Geiger counter on a plane flight, is how much radiation is up there just at 30,000 feet. And you're allowed one or two chest x-rays a year. You get a chest x-ray every 2 or 3 minutes. And out there, that was a problem. If you look at some of the symptoms of problems some of the early astronauts had, you'd realize that it probably was radiation poisoning.
How did the mass that constituted all that extra shielding in
My feeling that the extra mass that was there on that station was shielding.
How did it get up there?
That's an interesting question. I didn't see us launch anything that could have taken it there.
Did the Russians launch it there?
Not that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've seen...
Okay. Now, what that implies, then, is that we could never have made it to the moon in the way that it had been advertised that we went to the moon, because everyone would have been fried. Is that too simplistic a conclusion?
Well, that's my conclusion. I mean, I know one thing. You can go to look at the moon diorama at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and you can ask the question, was the lander pressurized with oxygen? They said no, we didn't have a place for it. They had to wear their spacesuits. And here's the astronaut standing there with his spacesuit on, and here's the door to the lander open, and you can see that spacesuit wouldn't fit through that door without the astronaut in it.
Yeah. Right. But
So I
now,
did have a bit, there's a bit of speculation
Yeah.
there.
what we've been told by our witness, Henry Deacon, is that some of the Apollo missions did actually go to the moon, but not without help from our friends, as it were. Can you make any comment on that, or is this
Well,
not?
it's my feeling as a scientist that if we went to the moon, we had to have help from friends.
Okay.
And off-world friends you're talking about.
I'm talking about
We're talking about friends in high places.
friends in high places,
Okay.
from high places.
Yeah. But we do have friends in high places, do we?
As far as I know.
Do we have any enemies?
As far as I know, we do.
And is
There
that
have been malevolent things happen all over the world that, you can't deny cattle mutilation. And you can't deny some personal or human mutilation,
right?
or certainly biomedical manipulation. I mean, it's happened. Somebody did it, and it could have been done from here. But when you examine that, Linda Moulton Howe has written extensively and spoken extensively on these things and examined them extensively. I grew up with her in the same school system in the same town, and know that she was exceedingly bright and got brighter and brighter as time went by. And I don't doubt that a lot of her conclusions are correct conclusions. She's someone that I would absolutely trust in that. And it appears to me, I say if something happens in one spot, you don't know. But when something happens time after time, year after year, in all different kinds of locations where people don't know each other and don't communicate with each other and don't read each other's newspapers, and it doesn't make the press, it seems highly likely that those things happened.
I understand. Now, among many other things, you are, let me use the word, an electronics genius, if I may. And are you in possession of any information about the constitution of implants that have been recovered from abductees?
Well, I've talked to people who have removed what they felt were implants. I deal almost daily with nanoelectronics and microelectronics, and the descriptions and pictures I've seen have nothing to do with any nano and microelectronics that we have in this, from anyone that I know of here on this planet. Many of them or most of them are biological in nature. I know that one doctor who's removed a number of what they felt were implants, the implant acted like it was alive and moved through the body away from the surgeon trying to remove it. I knew that some of them, when they were taken out, were minutely dissected, and I've seen the pictures of that. And they're devices that signals could be obtained from that were obviously intelligent signals. They were not random things, they were not biological things. And yet it was biological material that had obviously been engineered for a specific purpose.
That's really
And
valuable.
I've never seen anything in writing that would lead me to believe that we had that kind of technology on this planet.
And when we're talking about friends or enemies in high places, you'd feel that wasn't a particularly friendly thing to do.
I have no idea. It could well have been. And I wouldn't doubt but we've had that from both sides, friends and enemies.
Okay.
I think there are people here. There are people that I felt had crucial knowledge to the perpetration of the planet the way we'd like it to be. And I've seen them saved from disease miraculously, but they had some incident that they seemed to have a memory of that we would call maybe an abduction or maybe a kidnapping and manipulation.
So they're being helped and supported.
They're being helped and supported, it appears, from somewhere.
Yep. Our experience would support that, all the testimony we received from a lot of people. It's just interesting to hear your view. This is something we didn't even talk about yesterday.
Well, I try to look at everything from a scientific viewpoint, from a really unbiased observational point of view. And being as I got involved in quantum physics early, which is something that deals a lot with probability, I try to figure the probabilities of things, make observations and feel the probability, well, what would this mean? From a probability standpoint, what's the probability that it just happened spontaneously and the probabilities are approaching zero? What's the probability that we had something that would do this? Probabilities are zero or very low. What's the probability that it might have come from some outside intelligent source? The probabilities are up in the 99% region. and then after you see one after another of these, you begin to think, maybe I'm on the right track here.
Yeah, when does it become a reasonable certainty? Yeah, right. We've just mentioned the testimony from our witness and colleague Henry Deacon, and now you talked about your experience working with quantum physics. You told us about... Sorry, let me start this again. Henry told us about his research work in what some people call signal non-locality, or action or communication at a distance. One of the holy grails of physics is to build a working device such that there can be instantaneous communication that can traverse light years in no time. Is this something which you're able to talk about at all? Do you have any opinions, experience?
Well, I've done a number of experiments, and I definitely have opinions, and I can say that Maxwell was right. One of the things I found out was...
This is James Clerk Maxwell.
James Clerk Maxwell, who wrote the first exposition of electromagnetic theory, and from a little bit of his work, the way I like to describe his work, it's like you took a white sheet of paper and he took the end of a paintbrush and dipped it in paint and made splotches all over this white sheet of paper. He said, here's something I saw, here's something I believe, here's something I've experimented on, and so forth. So now you have a white sheet of paper with a lot of splotches, which I liken to a window that you could peek through just a few holes in the window, and each time you peek through you see something different. There's a lot of the area that was still white that he hadn't done any experiment in, but there were a lot of various areas where he actually did something and had experiments that were repeatable and were eventually describable, if not explainable. So then he took one large bunch of these and he wrote electromagnetic theory around that. And so that electromagnetic theory allowed us to build motors and generators, electric motors, electric generators, radio transmitters, television transmitters, radio and television receivers, computers, internet, etc., over a period of time. And so that was passed on down through a line of scientists, engineers, physicists, and so forth, and became those motors and television and so forth. But what happened to all the other splotches? Many of them were never continued. The knowledge was never continued. It was never written about, etc., etc. So early on, I went and replicated most of the papers, most of the notebooks, most of the letters that went back and forth, and I started looking at some of these other things. One of the things that got out that people did look at was a thing called action at a distance, which meant that something happened in point A, and at point B, which could be clear across the universe, information could be sent from point A to point B faster than the speed of light, and it didn't travel, it literally went through some sub-universe or parallel universe from A to B instantaneously and with no energy required. Just now in Canada and in Belgium and in France and in some areas in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of research being done in that. And so it's something it's been known at MIT, for example, for many years. But MIT knows if they talk about it, they got to back up and say all the physics we're teaching isn't exactly correct. So that really hasn't happened, but they want to know that if Harvard says something, that they can say we've known about it for years. And there was a gentleman that I had met several occasions, that ran a kind of an anomalous research institute that found that these things that kind of violated the pet laws of physics, they continued to take a look at them, but they knew that if that actually worked and was something that could be repeated, that they better revise their thinking. And for one reason or another, mostly ego, political, or economic, a lot of that stuff wasn't brought out.
What can you say about whether there were any practically functioning devices built that were able to utilize this theoretical principle of communication or action at a distance?
Probably nothing.
Okay. I remember that Henry Deacon said that he had actually worked on these devices. He said that the work had been done at Livermore prior to Alan Aspect's experiments in Paris in the 80s.
Yeah, the problem is when you said practical.
Okay.
Now here's the problem. If you have something that works that doesn't use electromagnetic radiation, you have to develop a whole entirely new technology. Like, how do you tune it? You know, when you tune a radio, what you're doing is altering the problems with practical. We may have a practical technology or not. I know that once I get my lab built, we're going to have a practical technology, because I have a lot of work that I've done and ideas that I've done, and I now need to build a prototype. And it's how to tune something that doesn't have a time function. And so how can you transmit more than one signal at a time? And then I don't necessarily want to expose that information, because not that it's going to be a $1 billion product, which it would be. I mean, imagine a cell phone that'll work anywhere in the universe with no energy, or such little energy that it's inconsequential. And so, or internet that works that way.
As Hal Puthoff once said to me, somebody who I believe you once know, he said to me, as the dog said, so many trees and so little time.
Exactly right, exactly right.
So at this point, I'm going to thank you very much for the conversations we've had both yesterday and today. We're still on tape. We've got some time left here today. I'm going to hand over to Kerry with the microphone and the camera. David also wants to ask you some questions about his particular interests, and we want to make sure that we can capture all of this as we possibly can do. So with huge reluctance, I'm going to get out from behind this camera, because I'd love to talk to you for hours more. I hope we're going to get this opportunity later.
Thank you very much for your interest. Been involved with trying to build flying saucers. You usually found flying saucers, if you look at most of the movies, there's always seems to be a robot involved with it.